Welcome to Creative Arts Apothecary. I'm your host, Marina Tselner, and I'm so happy to introduce my guest, Brooke Adams Law. Brooke is an award-winning author and founder of the Writing Brain movement. Brooke helps creative, intuitive women claim their author identity so they can start, finish, and publish brave, dazzling books. Brooke's debut novel, Catch Light, won the Fairfield Book Prize, was named the Best Indie Book of 2020, and was featured on Good Morning America's blog. Brooke is famous for teaching a juicy, receptive, divine, feminine, inspired, creative process that has inspired her clients to write and finish books they love, find new layers of richness in their original book ideas, and give birth to their most empowered creative selves. You can visit Brooke's website. We will link this video to her work. It's www.wearewritingbrave.com. And you can sign up for her Writing Brave newsletter there. Brooke is available to help clients in every stage of the book writing process, getting started and organizing ideas, maintaining momentum during the drafting and revising phase, and providing laser-focused developmental editing and offering hybrid publishing services. Brooke, welcome.
Yay, thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Same. I'm really excited to speak with you, and thank you. Awesome. So can you tell us a little bit more about the kind of work that you do, or your personal journey that led you to sharing the way?
Yeah, it's so interesting because I started my business maybe 5 years ago, and I started out as a copywriter. So I was writing, marketing materials for like online businesses, like coaches. And then one of my business coach said to me one day, like, you have this beautiful book. And she was just like, why are you trying to be a copywriter? Like, you're supposed to help. And she was just like, you're supposed to help other people write their books, right? And be more creative, like in your own business. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so true, right? And so I started off, the very first thing I did was something called the Writing Circle, and it was live writing time. So we would gather on Zoom and everyone would write together in silence for like an hour. And one of my clients like wrote almost a whole book that way. We did that for like a year, and she wrote like so much, just like one day a week. So in any case, that was sort of the beginning. And now I do offer still that live writing time. And then I also have a 6-month mastermind where people really get a lot of both like nuts and bolts about how to think about writing a book and kind of like structure and writing tools, dialogue, things like that. But then also I do a lot on the energetic side as well, of like, how do you keep moving through when you feel stuck? And how do you listen to the book that wants to come through you? How do you channel from that other place instead of trying to write it out of your head? So it's really fun.
Yeah. Ooh, yeah. Those are really juicy subjects. All of those. Can we dive into them a little bit more? Like, because you and I, we spoke a little bit how, like, yes, it does have to do, creating your dreams or realizing those creative visions that we have. Sometimes it's just the tools, like, I don't know which paintbrush to use. I don't know which pen or word processor to use. Then there's the other side of the equation, like you're saying, is the energetic side. There's something beyond just the how to. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think I come across people who are kind of, like you said, like stuck in the how-to, and they keep taking classes and workshops on the how-to, but then they're still not writing their book. And it's sort of like, I'm always really curious about like what's going on underneath, right? What's happening for them emotionally or energetically. And what I find is a lot of times, there's like a lot of things at play, right? One is like the whole perfectionism piece, and it's partly like, they want it to be right the first time. So they want everything they write to be like ready to publish. Right? It's like, and it makes it so hard. And so a lot of times what I teach is like the idea of beginner's mind, of like, how do you practice this like new skill and like be bad at it for a while? Like, how do you be okay with writing badly, sometimes for 100 pages? And then trusting the process that something's going to come out of all of that you're going to be able to use, but to be able to keep plugging away at it, even when it doesn't feel good, like it doesn't, like what you're producing isn't good to your kind of exacting standards. So I think that perfectionism is one part of it. And I think Another part, which kind of underlies the perfectionism, is I teach a lot about this idea of creative wounding, that we all have these creative wounds that have happened to us, like usually in childhood, but then like all the way right up to the present day, right? And I define it very broadly as like a creative wound is any time that you made something and it didn't get the reaction that you wanted, right? So this is everything from like the time you painted something and then your mom like threw it in the garbage, right? Or the time that you wrote something and like I have a lot of people who say that their teacher told them at some point like you could never be a writer, or someone like criticized their writing so badly that they've never been able to go back to it. But like all the way up to like you did a presentation for work and it got criticized by your boss, or like someone didn't see like all the love and care that you put into it, right? So I think it kind of extends into our adult lives. And when we roll over those and we're just like, oh, it's no big deal, like I'm just going to brush myself off and get back up, and we don't sort of give that part of ourselves that's hurt like some tender love and care, like they kind of calcify those wounds and like fester, and it becomes difficult then to like open that part of ourselves again.
But it still plays a role though, even if we can't like open that part of ourselves, it's still active. So it seems.
Yeah, right. It's like waiting. It's like waiting for you to tend to it and open it up again, right? So Brene Brown has this quote that I use all the time where she says, unused creativity is not benign, right? So this idea that like if we all have a creative force, and if we don't use it, it can turn malignant, right? So I think we all kind of owe it to ourselves and our creative selves that we kind of like gently open some of those wounds back up, and we just say, like, you don't even have to do anything major. Just be like, yeah, I see you. Like, just like, even just writing it down on paper sometimes, of like, just like lists of things that were painful when you made something, it can kind of start to dissolve like some of that shame and stigma around it, and kind of open back up some of that possibility.
So good. Yeah, this is definitely a big theme coming up in this series, but somehow creating beyond shame, beyond stigma, like just
Yeah.
honoring that call that that we hear it for a reason. And what do you say to the audience out there? Like, I often hear, I have these ideas, but life keeps happening. I can't create. What do you say?
Yeah. Yes. The first thing I will say is that I see you and life happens, right? So I run my own business as a book coach, and I run a small publishing company, and I'm also like writing my second book, and I have two little kids who are 6 and 3. So life is happening, right? And, and it keeps on happening. And I think the two skills that have served me just like in the best stead have been, having like, so I prefer to create a little bit every day. So like, but I think finding the way that I like to create was the most helpful. And when I had kids, it had to change, and it took me a long time to like figure out like what my new rhythm was going to be, because sitting down first thing in the morning alone for an hour, like just was no longer feasible. Because it was like, I used to try to get up early, and then they would like hear me moving around and they would wake up, and it was just like a nightmare. So what works for me right now is this micro practice of, I write 200 words a day. And because I write fiction, for me, I find it's really helpful for me to do a little bit every day to kind of keep the world alive. And I have clients who really like to do like, they'll have a deadline where they have to submit chapters to me. And so like the day before, they'll just clear the day and they'll do like a writing sprint, right? And having like a sprint and a deadline is like really helpful to them. So I think, and a lot of them will say like, they always feel guilty that like they shouldn't write that way, that they should write, a little bit every day like I do. And I'm like, no, I don't care. Like, I don't care what you do. Right. So it's figuring out, I think, what works for you and actually fits into your life. And then like not feeling bad or guilty or like it should be different. Right. It's like, it's your own process. And I think like that trial and error of like figuring out what actually fits, right? So I have other folks who will block off like a Wednesday afternoon for like 1 hour, right? And that works for them every week. They can do it for 1 hour. Or like some of my clients will buddy up and they'll meet on Zoom and like write together, right? So I think, that accountability is helpful. So I think just figuring out like what works for you to like do these like micro bits over time. And I think the other piece of how to keep like stay creative when life is happening is to have a routine that you can go back to like after the life happens, right? So I think the skill of being able to like restart the routine after you've been out of it is like more essential than people realize, right? So because it's not like you can go months and months without ever missing a day or a week or a couple of weeks, right? So right now in real time, like I just had a horrible cold that I just got over, so I haven't written anything in like a week. But also I know that like tomorrow or the next day when I start feeling better, like I will just go back up to my studio and I have, you know, a little ritual that I do that I love. And it's like, and I'll sit down and write 200 words. And it's like the skill of like coming back to that practice is like almost more important than trying to do it every single day, like even if it's not working. I think the last thing I say about, you know, writing when or creating when life is happening is like, when there's something really intense happening, I often tell people to like choose an amount of time that they're not going to worry about creating for.
Mm.
So like last winter, my mom was hospitalized. And so I said to myself, like, okay, I'm going to not write for like a month and then I'm going to see how she's doing. And I will reevaluate like 1 month from now and then decide if I have the capacity to do this or not. So it's not like I didn't feel guilty that whole month. I was like, I'm doing this. I'm taking care of my mom. I'm taking care of my kids. Like that's enough. And then when the month was up, I was like, okay, do I have the capacity to go back or not? And being able to like decide instead of feeling guilty about it, I think was much more empowering.
Absolutely. And it's just very level and objective too, instead of judging yourself, or just to know that, you know, sometimes when you're, you know, sometimes you got to do something else, let's say, that just to know that you can come back to a place of practice that's super empowering. I mean, for the longest time I was like, oh, I stopped, that means I'm someone who stopped. I was never like someone
Right.
who stops and then picks up again.
Yes. Or someone who like, sorry, life happens to, and then exactly they pick it up. I think it's like remembering that we're not kind of robots or like automatons, like we don't just go and go forever. There's seasons where we can create more or less, but it's like, again, that skill of coming back to it regardless.
Oh, and I love how you say seasons. It's also very cyclical, and you know, and yeah, beautiful. So and you talk about, write about the divine feminine, or you teach about, or how can you tell us more about that?
Yes. So I think there is this trend in kind of there's a lot of people online that teach book writing. And a lot of it from what I've seen is very goal oriented. So it's very like, you know, get your book done in 6 weeks or 3 months, whatever it is, right? Right. There's this contest or there's this challenge every November called NaNoWriMo, which is National Novel Writing Month. You're supposed to write a novel in a month. It just like, I'm like, oh my gosh. So meanwhile, my book Catchlight, which is right here, took me 7 years to write. And I think there's something about
Mm.
in the creative process, like at least with the folks that I work with, right, it's very attractive to them of like leaning away from this like masculine sort of driven, like hustle energy, trying to produce something, trying to get it done. Again, being very goal oriented, like kind of like racing through pages. And instead, like leaning into this like feminine, like receptive, creative energy of like letting things unfold and seeing where they lead and sort of not having like a set clock or a timeline on the project, but sort of letting it unfold at its own pace. And again, what you were saying about like seasons and being very cyclical, right? Like women's bodies, even like cycling, right? Over the month, it's sort of like there's different seasons where writing goes faster or slower. And that, right? I think it's just, it feels so much gentler. And I find that people sort of burn out less, like they don't burn out because it's like, right, you just sort of are writing at the pace that feels good. And this piece about like the receptivity of like right? So Julia Cameron talks about this in The Artist's Way of like, she says about morning pages, like you don't have to, or even like just about creating, like you don't have to think something up, you're trying to get something down. So it's sort of like you're kind of channeling something that already wants to come through. It's like you don't have to like create it in your brain. It sort of exists in this other place, right? And when you can kind of channel that, you can kind of like lean back a little bit and let that receptive energy take over, right? You can kind of channel with more power than when you're trying to like, right, be very in your brain about it.
Mm, absolutely. Yeah, that makes sense. And I love how she writes about that too. Yeah, and it's not about controlling it so much. It's,
Mhm.
yeah, receiving it, letting it come through you. Um, cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And I think like really interesting things come out, right? I mean, like all artists talk about like being able to get out of their own way, right? So there's a character in my book, Catchlight, who he sort of came out of like, so like a professor gave me an exercise, like try writing from another character's perspective, right? I already had like a main narrator, and she's very like logical and, she's kind of like driven. And then her brother, James, is an alcoholic and he's like totally the black sheep of the family, all this stuff. And I started writing some things from his perspective and like, his voice came through so strongly and it came from this totally other place. And I was like, I don't know where this is coming from, but it's really interesting. Right. And I was able to like, right. So he then became the second main narrator of the novel. And I've had people say to me, like, how did you make him up? And I was like, I didn't. Like he just came and like started talking to me and he had this like very specific perspective and like a very strong voice, like from the beginning. And I don't know where he came from, but I sort of like Julia Cameron says, like, I just took dictation of like what he was saying to me. Right. And then, I mean, he makes all kinds of decisions that I don't even agree with. Right. But I felt like it was very true to his character. So I think I would never have been able to just like make him up in my brain, but I was able to kind of tap into the place where his voice was, and it came through really strongly.
oh, exciting. That's fantastic. And so your work is fictional, but this process can apply to any kind of writing, yes, or in your experience.
Yeah. It's interesting because I write fiction, but most of my clients write nonfiction.
Huh.
So it's interesting. And I think that, yeah, the process of like leaning back and sort of like, right, being more receptive, it applies to all writing and I think all creating. Yeah. And I think a lot of the process that I work through in my mastermind, it applies to like to both fiction and nonfiction and sort of being able to, again, it's like tending to those creative wounds, like coming back to your writing, even when you've been away from it, having compassion for yourself, right? Like being gentle with yourself, and then being able to channel what wants to come through you. I think all of those things apply across, which is really fun.
Yeah, it feels really good. Like hearing you talk about it, it's just
Mm.
yeah, it's got that support to help us deliver what we know we have inside of us, what's
Yeah.
coming through, all of that. Yeah, super. There's something that can you share with us, like what surprises you? What surprised you the most over working in the way that you do?
Oh, I love this question because that's actually something I ask people all the time is like, what surprised you about your writing today? So
Ah,
I think just like being able to tend to the surprises is like so fun, right? So I think in the new novel that I'm writing now, um, it's the same, right? I write very intuitively. And so when I'm first starting a book, like I have an idea for like a character or a situation and I have no idea like what's going to happen. I don't really plan. I sort of listen for a long time. I channel what's coming through. And then and the whole time I'm like, I have no idea where this is going. I have no idea where this is going. Right. And sometimes things will come out where it's clearly like foreshadowing something. And I'm like, I wonder what that's going to be. Right. Like, I don't know what it's going to be. And sometimes it can be like infuriating. Right. I'm just like, I just want to know, like, where are we going? Like, what's going to happen. Right. And then once I have like, I don't know, like, I think over the summer I had like maybe 100 pages. And so I stopped and I sort of like looked at what I had and I did some structuring and I did a little bit of like thinking about like where it might be going, right? So I was able to pull back and do some of that work, but I think Even though sometimes I'm like, I just want to know, but I think mostly like being able to lean into that space of like being surprised is really fun. And I think the cool thing is that happens like not just in fiction, but also when people are writing nonfiction, right? So they come in, they have a very clear idea of what their book is going to be. And then as it starts kind of speaking to them, they're like, oh, it's really about this, right? And this whole other possibility opens up that they hadn't seen. So I think it's really important to kind of like,
Mm,
even when you're writing about your real life, being able to write, being able to be surprised by what wants to come through and how it wants to be told, I think is really important to kind of stay in that magic.
yeah, yeah. I really like how you say that. Because if you're writing nonfiction, I can see how you, or if you're writing anything, but I can see how you can come in to the process with like very fixed ideas. So
Mm,
it's really beautiful to allow for your writing, for your creativity to sort of take on its own
yeah.
life and to show you, reveal itself to you.
Yeah.
That's
And I think I love the way you said that. And I think sometimes people who want to write like a memoir or people who are writing kind of a personal development or like self-help style book, they know they want to write a book and they even know maybe sort of the general topic, what it's about. But because they don't know yet what the structure is going to be, what stories they're going to tell, like they think that they're not ready, but it's like, you probably are ready. It's like, but you have to start like laying the foundation right before, right, the perfect structure can come through or before the perfect set of stories can come through, right? And I told this example recently of like, so Glennon Doyle, who wrote Untamed and is, super bestseller, when she was writing Untamed, she had written like 150 pages or something. She gives it to her friend Elizabeth Gilbert, and Liz was like, "This is not the right structure. You have, like, right?" Like she was just like, "It's too conventional." And so then she was like, "Oh shit," right? And so then she like went back, but then she came up with this idea of like the image of the cheetah, and she has like these three sections: cages, keys, and free. And it's brilliant. But also she didn't sit down and she was like, "Okay, I'm going to talk about the cheetah, and then we're going to have these three sections." Like it didn't
mm,
happen that way, right? She had written like 150 pages already, and she had to rewrite all of that stuff, right? So I think that sometimes there's this fallacy, especially with books. And I would imagine with other art too, if you're like looking at a painting or something, that you just assume that the author or the creator like had this vision of the final product in mind. And then they just set about like putting it on paper. And that's not how it happens at all. It's just like, right. It's very messy and intuitive and surprising. And you just have to like buckle yourself in for the ride.
so exciting. And can this keeps coming to me, but how do you not judge yourself along the way? 'Cause I've heard so many times from many people like, I want to do this, but then it's not this and that. Like, how do you know
Mm.
what it is already? We haven't done it yet. Like, how do you quiet that voice and let yourself be surprised?
Yeah, I love this. So I will first just say, like, I can totally empathize. And after I finished my first book, I started and then abandoned, I think, like three other books. And I hadn't even seen that I had done that until like recently, like very recently. And what I saw was like, oh, I got to the point in all of those ideas where I had no idea like where it was going or like what I had written a bunch of stuff and I was like, I just don't, it was just like so messy. I felt like I had nothing to stand on. And what I learned with this book was how to go through that part again when it feels so unstable. There's like no solid ground. And it's just like, how do I keep creating? So I was asking myself that question, like, how do you keep creating? And I think it's like, one is like a commitment to your original vision of like, okay, I started on this journey because I had this vision of making this thing, and like maybe even reminding yourself like why it was making that thing important or exciting or fun, right? And sometimes I might even like go back to be like, oh, like when I described that project, people like so and so was like really excited about it, and this other person was like, I would totally read that, or whatever it is, right? So reminding myself like, oh, like other people thought this was a good idea too. Like, and sort of like reminding myself like, okay. And then I remind myself like, okay, this idea came to me, and that means it wants to be written through me. and like it is waiting for me to execute it. Like it is waiting for me to like bring it to fruition. And if I'm not going to do it, like it's either going to go find someone else or it's going to go like unmade, right? So sort of almost honoring the idea itself that wants to be made, right? So Madeline L'Engle talks about this idea of being a servant of the work, that we are not the masters of the work, but we are its servants. And so like, sometimes I will almost say to my book, like, I don't know like what to do next, right? Like, what's the next thing? And like, sometimes, right, it becomes very clear. So in this case, like with this book over the summer, I reached this point of like, again, it was so messy and I was like, I don't know, like, right. And I was feeling just like, what am I even doing? And so I took myself on a writing retreat for like 2 or 3 days with some friends. And I didn't even write, I don't think I wrote anything new, but what I did was just think about the book and think about how it was organized. And just like, I talked to my friends out loud about it, and it just like unlocked something. Like all of a sudden I could see how the pieces were starting to fit together, and I could see like dimly where it was going. Right. So I think sometimes like just listening for like, what is like, and I couldn't do that in 200 words a day, right? Which is like my normal mode, right? So listening for those times when you have to like get out of that mode. And then I think for like the critical voice, it's sort of just like almost like eavesdropping on it and being like, would I talk to other people that way? Like like my 6-year-old is learning how to read. I'm like, would I talk to him that way and be like, you're so stupid? Like, I would never say that to him. Like, oh my gosh. Right. And it's like that part of you that's creating is like also that 6-year-old.
Beautiful. Yeah. Really supports that you have this, insight, this perspective of someone who's working with little kids too. And for me as a mother to hear you talking about that, that's very supportive too, because oftentimes, I mean, I've had mentors or teachers who have been like, how about later when your kids are adults? And I'm like, what? I can't wait that long. Are you kidding?
Oh my gosh, I hate that idea. Like parents get to be creators too. And it's like, we just figure out like, yeah, carve out that little space and time, even if it's like a little time a day. And I feel like it's good for our kids. Like I heard a speaker say recently, like there's a lot of power in kids hearing like mommy is not available. Like, or daddy is not available. But like, I think women tend to struggle more with that permission piece, but it's like, we get to give ourselves that permission. Like, and I think there's something too about like, if mothers are not making art, then like the world is missing out on a perspective that is like so crucial, right? Like, and I don't think it's not fair to say like, just wait until your kids are older. Like that doesn't make any sense, right? Like, no, that's crazy town.
Yeah. So I love that you have this adaptable approach, like where you are and specifically like what suits you, like what suits this writer might be a little bit different, what suits that writer. But the idea is just keep going, keep creating, keep writing. So that's great. Can you tell us a little bit how people can get in touch with you, to keep following your work?
Yes. So the best way to do that is to go to my website, which is wearewritingbrave.com. And you can get on the Writing Brave newsletter there and stay in touch. And my website has like all the ways that you can work with me. And I'm very proud of it because I just redid it. And I feel like it's like it feels very aligned with everything I do, where before it was feeling a bit outdated. So in any case, and if you sign up for the newsletter, then you'll kind of get the weekly newsletter and hear what I'm working on and new juicy tools that are coming through that I share, and then how to work with me going forward if you want to.
Awesome, Brooke. Thank you. Thanks for the inspiration. It was a lot of fun. I love the attitude that you bring to this whole creative process. Is there anything else you'd like to say or mention before we go?
Oh, well, the last thing, this is so fun. The last thing I will say, just because it's in honor of the name of your series, Creative Arts Apothecary, which is my new book, which I was talking about, is called The Apothecary of Stories. And so I felt very related to the title of your series. I was like, yes, right. So there's some sort of energetic connection there that we have. So
I love
thank
it.
you
I
so much.
love
It
it.
was so fun.
Yeah. Yeah. And thank you. And best of luck on your new book and everything that you're doing. And to our audience, to everyone, remember to keep it creative and have a great day. Bye.